This is a grand epic, not entirely aligned with history, yet its storyline remains captivating. The Battle of Kadesh is one of the most famous battles, still widely recounted today. Ramses led a surprise attack on the Hittite kingdom's borders with 3,500 chariots and nearly 40,000 fighters, aiming to seize the Hittite kingdom's main military stronghold in Syria. The Hittite king, having received intelligence in advance, personally led 16,000 troops to guard the border, hoping to avoid the war. However, the battle was inevitable. At Ramses' command, his chariot forces launched the first attack. A rain of arrows descended upon the Hittite charioteers, causing significant losses before they even engaged. Ramses then ordered a second volley, with arrows pouring down like rain on the enemy's vanguard. The already heavily damaged enemy charioteers suffered further devastation, seeing their initial attack capability lost. The shield-bearers formed a line, attempting to stop Ramses' advancing heavy chariots. However, the war horses leaped over the shield formation, the wheels crushing through, breaking the defense line, and scattering the enemy. With the enemy's formation in disarray, General Moses ordered light cavalry to charge from the rear, mercilessly attacking the Hittite soldiers. But at that moment, Ramses' charioteer was struck by an arrow and killed, forcing Ramses to drive the chariot himself. However, a good warrior is not necessarily a good charioteer. Caught between two enemy chariots, Ramses soon found himself in a difficult situation. In a critical moment, another chariot appeared and knocked him over. Struggling to his feet, Ramses tried to retrieve his weapon. Just then, another chariot charged at him. He was about to be crushed under the wheels. At the last minute, Moses saved Ramses by picking up a spear from the ground and shoving it into the wheel of an oncoming chariot. However, this act of Moses would eventually lead to his downfall. Before the army set out, Pharaoh, following centuries-old tradition, had a priestess predict the outcome of the campaign. The priestess foretold that in this battle, a ruler would be saved by another, who would one day become a new leader. Moses dismissed it as a charlatan's lie, but Ramses took the prophecy seriously. Seeing the first part of the prophecy come true, Ramses became distracted from the battle. He picked up an enemy spear and aimed it at Moses, his childhood companion. Sensing something was wrong, Moses ordered Ramses to be taken away. Soldiers carried the injured Ramses onto a chariot, and the army retreated. Thus, the Battle of Kadesh came to an end. Though neither side claimed victory, the people celebrated their return. However, Pharaoh sensed something amiss on the battlefield. Under his questioning, Moses revealed how he saved the prince. Pharaoh was not surprised. He even thought Moses was more suited to be Egypt's next ruler than his own son. But Moses was only his sister's son. A few days later, dissatisfied with his son, Pharaoh sent Ramses to Ramses to inspect the pyramid construction. To the kingdom's elite, this was a task for lower-ranking officials. On the eve of Ramses' departure, Moses offered to go in his place, hoping Ramses would forget the battlefield incident. But a seed of doubt had already been planted in Ramses' heart. Even if he didn't speak of it, the prophecy haunted him. When Moses arrived at Ramses, a 400-year-old Hebrew prophecy was about to unfold. Upon seeing the pyramid construction site, Moses was shocked. Hundreds of thousands of Hebrew slaves had toiled there for centuries. To appease the slaves, he sought to understand their true feelings. This conversation inadvertently revealed a prophecy among the Hebrews. When an elder learned Moses' identity, he sent a slave to secretly deliver a letter, inviting Moses to meet in the prayer house. This meeting would change the fate of Moses and the Hebrew slaves building the pyramids. When Moses was born, a prophecy spread across Egypt. A new leader would arise to liberate the Hebrews. The rumor reached Pharaoh, who ordered the massacre of all Hebrew newborns that year, crushing their hope of returning to Canaan. But fate had other plans. In desperation, Moses' parents placed him in a basket and set him adrift on the river. Instead of being killed, Moses drifted to Pharaoh's sister, who raised him. He became a great commander of Egypt. This revelation left Moses questioning his identity, and he became restless. In anger, he killed 2 Egyptian soldiers who provoked him. This drew the attention of the pyramid overseer. During his investigation, he discovered Moses' true lineage.
How did it go?
We can talk about that another time.
We can talk about it now. You're sick.
Meanwhile, the old pharaoh died, and Ramses ascended as the new pharaoh. the pyramid overseer secretly informed Ramses of Moses' identity. Ramses, already harboring resentment, was enraged. Yet, when faced with killing his former brother, he couldn't do it. Instead, he exiled Moses to the desert. As Moses left, Ramses gave him his sword for protection. Moses wandered the desert for years, crossing mountains and rivers. One day, he found a village. While drinking water, he met his true love, Zipporah. Moses finally stopped wandering. They lived happily together. Years passed, and their child grew. They gazed at the sacred mountain, revered by Zipporah's people. Moses, an outsider, didn't believe in their God. This caused tension between him and Zipporah. Soon after, while herding sheep, a storm hit. A lost lamb climbed the mountain. Chasing it, Moses ascended the mountain. Suddenly, a mudslide buried him. The sky darkened. A voice awakened him. A blue flame appeared, and a boy stood beside him. The boy claims he needs a general to save his people. He showed Moses a model on a rock. When Moses awoke, the boy was gone. Miraculously, Moses found himself beside his wife. The storm and mudslide seemed unreal to her. The villagers thought Moses had a head injury, but he knew he had a mission. After recovering, he left his family for Ramses. Zipporah didn't understand, thinking their argument over faith drove him away. She cried, willing to abandon her beliefs for him. Unbeknownst to her, Moses had a greater purpose. Hebrew slaves worked tirelessly on the pyramids, dying from the labor. Furnaces burned bodies day and night. Moses, called by the messenger of God, arrived at Ramses. Seeing his people suffering, he awakened. He went to the prayer house, showing his weapon as a sign of resolve. Thus began the Hebrew slaves' rebellion after 400 years of oppression. Ramses awoke from a nightmare, filled with fear. He checked on his child, then went to the stables. There, a sword was at his throat, the sword he gave Moses. The brothers met again, but Moses wasn't there to reminisce. He demanded Ramses free 400,000 Hebrew slaves. Ramses believed the slaves were too accustomed to their life to survive if freed. Unable to agree, Moses left. He planned to end the oppression. He secretly forged weapons with the slaves, training them as soldiers and leaders. They prepared to fight Egypt's oppression. Ramses heard rumors and ordered a citywide search for Moses, but Moses evaded capture. Ramses gathered the slaves, warning them, if Moses wasn't found, he'd kill a family daily. The slaves lived in fear, unsure if they'd be next. Their resistance grew.
Their food, their property, their comfort. Only the Egyptian people can force him to accept our demands for freedom. We must force them to make him say yes. Yes? Yes!
They burned supply depots, cutting off resources. Then hundreds of rockets were fired in unison, and a rain of swords lit up the entire palace of Pharaoh. Supply ships sank, the rebellion intensified. Ramses ordered a night raid on the slave mountain. Many slaves died in their sleep. The fires lit the mountain. Seeing the deaths, one person couldn't bear it. He found Moses, the messenger of God. He urged Moses to act quickly. Human methods were slow. Moses needed time to dismantle Egypt. The messenger of God, silent for 400 years, acted.
For now, you can walk.
He unleashed 10 plagues on Egypt. The first disaster was the giant crocodiles in the water. Numerous subterranean beasts suddenly began to become frenzied, and they surfaced and began to kill each other frantically. All visible lakes in the water and fishermen living near the water were the first to be slaughtered. From then on, all the waters became a forbidden place where human beings did not dare to tread. The second disaster was the fish living in the water. All the fish did not escape the madness of the massacre. A little bit of star red, but eventually stained the entire Egyptian dynasty of every mountain and river. The water on which they depended was destroyed at the same time. Pharaoh's attempts to pray to the Egyptian gods to purify the water for them went unanswered. The third plague was even more terrifying. Countless frogs, deprived of clean water, emerged from the blood-polluted rivers, invading human settlements in search of a clean water source. The human territories were overrun by frogs, but they found no clean water and began dying en masse. Next came the terrifying fourth plague. The mountains of frog corpses quickly rotted, creating a paradise for maggots and flies. The ground and air were filled with them, contaminating the remaining food supply. The sky was darkened by swarms of flies, leaving humans powerless. In Pharaoh's palace, the ministers continue to discuss the idea that once the body is decomposed by the insects, the flies will die. They were unaware that a sudden plague, the fifth disaster, was imminent. All, including Pharaoh, developed mysterious diseases that even the healers couldn't cure, leading to mass deaths. Moses, unwilling to see civilians suffer, sent a white horse to negotiate peace with Pharaoh to quell the messenger of God's wrath. However, Pharaoh, considering himself a god, refused to submit to a foreign deity. Pharaoh's anger turned back to the Hebrew slaves, doubling their labor and increasing their deaths. Moses, who had made a pact with the messenger of God, was heartbroken, his faith shaken. Despite divine help, it was the civilians who suffered most. The sixth plague soon followed. The wilderness vanished, and livestock began dying. Pharaoh, seeing his beloved horse die, sought his healers' help, but the disaster was beyond their understanding. The chief healer lied, claiming that once the insects decomposed the livestock, peace would return, but Pharaoh punished him harshly. Pharaoh then sought the priestess's help, but she received no response from the gods. In anger, Pharaoh punished her too. The seventh plague arrived with thunderous roars, and hailstones the size of fists rained down, damaging even the statues of Egyptian goddesses. Humanity's last hope vanished. Moses, seeing the ominous sky over the royal city, wanted to end his pact with the messenger of God, but the messenger did not appear. As Moses left in anger, the messenger watched him, signaling that no one could stop the eighth plague. Locusts swarmed, devouring everything in their path, leaving desolation. The royal city was overrun, and its splendor faded. The ninth plague followed. People, deprived of food, could no longer rely on plants. They stormed the royal granary, trying to seize food from Pharaoh. The attempt ended in tragedy as a fire consumed the granary. Those who escaped with food faced Pharaoh's wrath. As his troops surrounded them, archers launched the first attack, arrows raining down on the fleeing people, followed by axemen finishing the survivors. Pharaoh watched from afar, unmoved. Suddenly, a lightning bolt struck, turning the troops to ash. The messenger of God prepared the final disaster, more terrifying than the previous 9 combined, which Moses refused to allow. To demonstrate his power, the messenger pierced the night with light, summoning a dreadful presence. This day became Egypt's darkest. At dawn, Moses returned to the Egyptian palace, hoping to persuade Ramses to reconcile and immediately release the 400,000 Hebrew slaves to return to their homeland. However, Ramses was not willing to listen. Before leaving, Moses advised Ramses to watch over his child that night. That evening, although the young pharaoh was unsure of what would happen, he lit all the lamps in the palace and stood guard over his child with the royal sword in hand. Meanwhile, back at the slave mountain, Moses ordered every household to slaughter a lamb and smear its blood on their doorframes. Though no one understood why, they followed Moses' instructions. As night fell, even Moses did not know what would happen next. Suddenly, a massive black shadow began to cover the land, plunging all of Egypt into darkness. As the shadow advanced, the entire slave mountain was engulfed, but they remained unharmed due to the lamb's blood on their doorframes. When the shadow reached the Egyptian capital, all lights were extinguished. More terrifyingly, all children under the shadow mysteriously died in an instant. Inside the Egyptian palace, as the shadow descended, the once brightly lit palace grew dim, and the burning lamps began to extinguish mysteriously. When the shadow passed over the young Egyptian prince, his life was instantly snuffed out. Ramses awoke with a start, sensing something was wrong, but it was too late. That night, Egypt's most prosperous city lost all its children, and the capital was filled with wailing. After the 10 plagues, Pharaoh could no longer bear it. The next day, he brought his deceased child to the gates of the slave mountain, humbly reconciling with Moses and agreeing to release the 400,000 Hebrew slaves to return to their promised land of Canaan.
back to the homeland of your dreams. But go!
After Pharaoh buried his son, a great pursuit began. When Pharaoh reneged and prepared to massacre the slaves, the messenger of God parted the sea with a sword. The slaves faced a vast sea ahead and tens of thousands of soldiers behind them. Trapped, they awaited their fate. The next morning, a miraculous scene unfolded, leaving tens of thousands in awe. The sea had receded, revealing dry land. At Moses' command, the Hebrews began their exodus across the sea. Meanwhile, Pharaoh led his chariots in pursuit, aiming to annihilate the Hebrews at the Red Sea. Moses predicted the treacherous mountain path would hinder Pharaoh's army. His prediction proved correct. The narrow path caused chariots to crash, leading to a chain reaction of disasters. The road collapsed, and Ramses paid the first price for his campaign. Meanwhile, the Hebrews reached the sea's center. The sea had dried, and they were close to Canaan. Ramses arrived, and at his command, his army charged into the sea. Moses saw the approaching Egyptian army and urged the Hebrews to hurry. As Pharaoh's army closed in, the messenger of God's wrath descended. Dark clouds, lightning, and storms approached the battlefield. As the Hebrews reached the other side, a massive wave surged like a beast, sweeping over the Egyptians. In the face of divine wrath, humans stood no chance. Ramses, claiming to be a god, charged at the Hebrews. His general ordered a retreat, leaving Ramses alone. Moses ordered his people to retreat to the shore, staying to face Ramses. As they neared, the waves loomed closer. They stopped, unable to speak, as time was short. Ramses shouted and charged at Moses. The waves surged, and Ramses was engulfed. Moses was also swept away. The retreating Egyptian army perished. Chariots and bodies filled the Red Sea. Egyptians, having lost their children, now lost husbands and sons. The Hebrews escaped their 400-year prison. Ramses, seeing the dead soldiers, watched vultures feast on them. He seems to have a twinge of remorse. Moses survived the disaster. He led the Hebrews to Canaan. Passing his homeland, Moses invited his wife to join him. The messenger of God delivered the 10 Commandments through Moses on Mount Sinai to guide the behavior of the Hebrew people. However, due to their loss of faith in the wilderness, God punished the generation by making them wander for 40 years until they passed away, including Moses, who was unable to enter the Promised Land. Ultimately, it was the new generation of Hebrews, led by Joshua, who entered Canaan.